9 months ago, my reel about how Indians struggle to get in shape went absolutely viral.
Why can't Indian people stick to their diet?
And here's a full video on why Indians struggle to get in shape. And if you're thinking, who's this white dude talking about Indians? I'm Nathan, founder of Autonomy. We help Indians in South Asia get in amazing shape and stay in shape forever whilst never giving up their social life or their Indian traditional food. And once upon a time, I was London's best personal trainer and a sports rehabilitation therapist. So I've been doing this 12 years and know a thing or two. And there's 5 gaps that South Asian people struggle with when getting in shape. And gap number 1 is the information gap. Whether they're getting their information from their auntie, their social media, whether they're getting from different parts of India, from the UK, from America, and the information gap has just completely changed now from going very little information about dieting, what really helps people get in shape, versus now having too much information and struggling to choose where you get the information from. From a South Asian perspective, there's Ayurvedic medicine, there's people that are just health conscious in India. Then you've got the yogis. Then you've got the auntie's opinion on how they lost weight. Then you've got the friends and family that you've seen at a wedding and how they lost weight. Then you've got ChatGPT. You've got all these different variations of information, which means it's hard to decipher what's real and what's fake, and who to trust and who not to trust. And normally the people in your circle, normally the family and friends that you have, are the closest real life information, because you see them change, you see the results that they get and think, oh my God, I want to get those things too. But just because someone gets in shape, just because a friend and family reduces their body fat, doesn't mean you want to be doing the same thing as them. And they actually might not even know why they got in shape, they just followed a specific plan. So the information gap within the community is so large and wide, and there's so many different opinions that you become overly confused and never actually take the right action for you. And before I move on to the next gap, the way that you should be looking at how you diet and what diet you should be going on and how many steps you do and what training program you do and what nutrition plan you follow, you need to follow these simple rules. If you eat traditional food and you plan on eating traditional food for the next 20 years, eat traditional food on a diet so you can teach yourself how to eat it, so that when you come off your diet and you look at that samosa and you don't eat 20 of them. Number 2 is, if you can't do 70% of what you're doing on your diet for the next 20 years, it's not a diet to follow for the long term. And number 3, there should be high levels of accountability that turn into responsibility. You need to know where you're going wrong, when you're going wrong, and have someone that has an outside opinion going, hey, make those changes. Don't do that next time. You need someone leading the way so that you don't get lost in the weeds as you're trying to lose weight and having these problems of plateauing or not seeing results or making mistakes continually as you go through this dieting process. And you need someone else looking out for you and holding you accountable to your decisions. Now, the gap number 2 for South Asian people to get in amazing shape is the motivation gap. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that I speak to on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis that are motivated by things that don't make long-term change. Imagine this, you go to a wedding, you get called fat or fat shamed, as most people do from their auntie that's probably larger than they are. And then they feel this guilt, they feel this trigger, they feel this shame. So then 2 days later, they start a diet. 2 days before the wedding, they weren't even thinking about dieting. They were probably kind of happy with the way they were. No urgency to get in real change. And maybe they had a small amount of detail that they wanted to change on their body. But because of this guilt and this shame that is driven within the community, which is a larger topic in general, it creates these short-term bursts of motivation that never last, because they're not your motivation. They're your aunties shaming you, and the guilt and shame motivation, which never lasts, because ultimately to get in amazing shape, to do a diet long term, you need to be willing to do things long term and do things even if you don't have the motivation to do them. Like, dieting is a 12, 16, 20 week process that will require you to get up and go to the gym or eat food that you're not particularly motivated all the time to do. And if you're only driven by guilt and shame, which is a large amount of people why they fail after weddings and Christmases and January starters, they never get long-term results. And then they always feel frustrated and round in these cycles until they truly have a motivation for themselves to make those big changes. That's part of the motivation gap, with the guilt and shame short-term results, and maybe you can relate to that. But the other part of it is actually within the community, for some reason, it's just accepted that you need motivation all the time to do these things. In reality, you should be doing things regardless because of their benefits, as opposed to only doing them when you're motivated. It's a large reason why the South Asians that can't get in shape, struggle to get in shape, is because they have this pretense that motivation is something that they should have before doing the things. Whereas if you rewind and you look at motivation as a psychological pretense, motivation is an output measure. You do something and get motivation. The only time when it's not true is the first time you feel it, when you step on the scales, you try those jeans on that you think, fuck, that doesn't fit anymore. That's when the only time it's an input measure. The rest of the time, motivation happens after you do something so that you redo it again. People get it wrong so much that they're waiting for motivation to hit them in the face, and the only time motivation is going to hit them in the face is when they're too fat and they get that measure of going, fuck, I need to make the change. And you don't want that always to be the only time that you have motivation, because that would be a tough place to be when your jeans don't fit you, or that you can't wear the dress that you want to, or that you have to buy XL instead of large t-shirts. You don't want to be in that situation where that's your motivation. So doing things despite of is the key concept for most South Asians who get in amazing shape and do it consistently and go over the motivation gap. Number 3 is the gap of change. With change, you often sometimes need a community or other people around you to see that that change is normal. If you're the first person in your family to take control of your health and fitness, and let's say, for example, you're living in a family home and there's 6 people, and there's one of you that's trying to eat healthy foods and lose some weight, and there's 5 people with type 2 diabetes and heart conditions, and there's enough roti and sugars to sink a ship in the house, then you're going to be in a position where change is not normal. And where we are in the realm of the South Asian community, you have pockets of people who are into their fitness, and they have their own group of South Asian people that are also into their fitness, and they've gone through particular coaching programs, or they've gone through fat loss journeys themselves and can bond over those things, so they're not just eating all of the time like the community does when you go to every single event. They're doing things like walking, running, eating healthy foods, going out for big activities. And there's pockets of the community that really align with health and fitness. But when you're not in one of those, and we call it the start of a spider web, where you are the one person out of the 5, 6 people that you're closest to that are trying to change by yourself. It can be a lonely endeavor, because whatever you try and do, there are people next to you doing the opposite behaviors of what you're trying to do. Unless you have that large goal, that large ability to do what other people aren't doing, and see it as a massive benefit as opposed to seeing that you missed out on things because other people aren't doing them, you tend to be in a position where change is harder because you're the only person doing it. Now, as you go through your journey, and what I realized, especially when I got friends that were in the fitness industry and they're personal trainers, it's much easier to eat good with other personal trainers because they're also eating good most of the time too. However, I've got a family who are largely obese, over 90 or 100 kilos, big takeaways, big eating out at the weekends, big biscuits, snackers, eat dessert after every meal. And when I was around those individuals when I was younger, hence why I had a weight problem, hence why I'm doing these videos, is that I found a struggle to step away from that because I was the only person doing it and it felt really unnatural. So I think the gap in the South Asian community comes from if you're 1 or 2 people in your close proximity who are trying to lose weight, who are trying to make their better health, but there are 10 other people in that same vicinity that are doing the polar opposite. It can feel quite lonely, it can feel quite different, it can feel like you're doing the wrong things, and there's lots of then moments where they try and pull you back into that negative mindset or that negative behaviors or eating separate foods. And that's where you have to be a lot more stronger, a bit more understanding your why, your resilience, have great structure, and not do things from a motivation perspective like we just spoke about before, and do it because of, as opposed to until I have motivation, I can't do it. So change is an ever-present part of this journey, and having more people around you that do the same thing will make it easier. But in that initial stages, be okay that you're going to be the lone wolf and that you're going to have to make those steps and those strides by yourself. And that can often be a deterrent for most people when they're trying to get in shape from the community. Number 4 is the resilience gap. So this is the moments of where over time there are statements and beliefs and things that you build up in your mind that are so strong that you believe them to be fact. Let me give you an example. Are you a type of person that says, I need to have my chai in the morning, or I couldn't just have one roti, or I couldn't go to bed on an empty stomach, or I couldn't even think about starting my morning without my soaked almonds and chai? These are all things where I need and I want and I have to are all premises of a belief system that are all made up. You don't need almonds and chai in the morning to wake up. You like and want to have those things because they make your life better. And that's okay, but within the South Asian community, we've converted wants into projected needs. I need to have this. I couldn't live without this. I couldn't live without rice in my lunch. You could, and you would absolutely be fine from a body perspective. And you've built up this strong relationship with food where you feel that you have to have things to survive, which is crazy because you can live with multiple days without food, multiple days without water. So you going a meal 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐫 without some rice, he's going to be absolutely fine. But these moments here are what I call the resilience gap. It's where you make these beliefs, you make these things that are not true, something that are a hurdle and a barrier in your journey. And everyone's got them. I like a Friday takeaway. I like to start my day with a chai or a latte. And for them to go on a diet, for me to then take some of those things away, I feel like my left leg's missing because I'm so used to it and I have an emotional connection to a takeaway in a weekend, or I have an emotional connection to having dinner out once a week. And when I go on these diets, I then make it harder for myself because I've thought that I needed to have them. There are nothing that you need in a diet, and this is where the community really struggle, is that you just need calories to survive. You don't need specific food like rice, roti, have sweet after a meal. These are all made up things that make your life better, but also make it harder for you to follow a resilient diet because sometimes those things are not contributing to you getting great results. You having sweets after every meal, handfuls of chevro, nuts on a day-to-day basis because you feel that you need them, are not useful to being in a calorie deficit. So this is where it's the resilience gap, because the resilience is doing what you need to do versus what you want to do. Within the community, there's a high weighting towards doing what you want to do and expecting results of what you need to do. Whereas you should align yourself to looking at everything that you think is true and all the beliefs that you think are true and start washing them away, but also at the same time factoring them in your diet. There's nothing wrong with a chai, there's nothing wrong with chevro, there's nothing wrong with rice and roti in the portion sizes that allow you to get the calories that you need to be on a diet. So the belief system and the resilience to challenge, I need roti, I need rice, is so important for you to stay long-term on a diet so that you don't feel like you're always fighting against this I need mode. And the last gap is effort and expectations. Now this comes in so many formats that I could do a whole video on just effort and expectations. And in the reel that went mega viral, I spoke about expectations, about the diets that people have been on as Indians or South Asians that make them fail. Most times they go on diets that are made for white people, chicken, sweet potato and veggies, or fish and chips, or oats for breakfast, or a bowl of fruit, for example. And for the large amount of the South Asian community that I work with, there is literally a 3-step process of what type of South Asian are you. And this is the determination of the diet that you go on. You've got the people that want to eat traditional food every single day, and they expect to eat traditional food. That's what they grew up on. It is the sambars, the idlis, the mung dals, the chiles, the paneers, whatever you want to have. That's what you do on a day-to-day basis, the dals and rice. And then you've got the middle ground, which is the people that eat it 3 or 4 times a week or eat it as an evening meal. Mainly these are the people that are in the UK or the US, where they kind of have breakfast and lunch like you would as a UK or US resident, and then the evening meal, that's when they'll break out the traditional food, the dal, the rices, whatever it is, and the subsies to get their fix of Indian food. And then you've got the third type of Indian or South Asian, which is they'd rather eat Mexican than sushi, and they'd rather eat out than they would Indian food, and they were separated from that culture from 18, 19, going to college or university in America, and never really having that connection with the food dependent on their family. Now, each one of these will have a different expectation of what a diet is, and also will then struggle or benefit from their expectations and the efforts that they put in. The reason why a majority of these two groups where Indian food is present within their diet generally fail is because of the information that they're giving or the expectations that they have on dieting itself. If you go into a diet expecting that you won't change anything about your life, you won't change the kind of foods that you eat, the protein contents, portion sizes, and you won't change anything, and you get to eat all your Indian food and you get to have all of the benefits too, well then you're going to be really disappointed because you can't continue doing the same things you're doing and getting different results. That's just stupid. And then on the flip side is the people that don't eat that much Indian food and they actually drink a lot, they go out for sushi and Mexican, but they still overconsume those foods too. They can't expect to do the same things on their diet and lose weight if they're gaining weight currently on their plan. So there's a middle ground of effort and expectations that needs to be aligned. For the majority of the time, the people on this left-hand side, which is the traditional food, they've been alienated and found it really hard to be successful on a diet because they haven't been able to eat their Indian food or their mum's cooking or they're eating out because no one's ever taught them how to do that, and which we do very, very well, and that's why I do videos like this, and that's why we're pretty successful. We have global clients across the world. We're up to 1,000 South Asian Indian people on a week-to-week basis. When we started doing that, these people on this side of the coin didn't have to change much of their expectations or their efforts to get it in amazing shape. They just had to tweak their portion sizes, had to tweak the amounts that you were expecting to eat, and how many times a day they were eating and what exercises that they were doing. But most of all, these people that made the changes did make some changes to their expectations. They didn't come in and say, I need to have 7 rotis in a meal, or I expect that I can eat every single thing that I have had for the last 10 years on a diet and be super, super happy with it. To solve the expectation gap for the South Asian community around the traditional food or the socializing needs one big thing. You understand there's a trade-off for your actions. So the trade-off is I get to keep eating traditional food, or I keep socializing or drinking alcohol or having my chevro or eating chocolate. But in return, I eat less of that thing so that I can enjoy it without giving it up to stay sane on a diet. So you have to give to get back. And that's where expectations are really lost within the community, because most people don't think they have to give anything back to get results in return. So once that's solved and you realize that to be able to make the trade-off to get in amazing shape, to eat traditional food, to socialize, to drink, there has to be a trade-off that is worthwhile to keep those things in. Because with dieting, with losing weight, it's not about indulgence more and more, it's about refinement of getting the most from the least and doing things with accuracy for what your body needs, not what your brain needs. So hopefully you enjoyed this video on why South Asians struggle to get in amazing shape. And YouTube's really, really clever. It's going to recommend one of our podcasts up here of a client that's gone through exactly the same thing that I just spoke about, from all the gaps to overcome all those. So you might want to click that and find out what happens when you solve those gaps and get in amazing shape.